We're on page Gimel, and on the second line from the top, we're quoting the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Cholem achilin oso al pi bekim," which means, how do we determine if a person has to eat on Yom Kippur? And the Mishnah establishes that it's bekim. Bekim are rofim that are experts. And they tell us that this chole, if he doesn't eat, his life will be in danger. Amar Rabbi Yanai. Now we're going to see two chidushim in Rabbi Yanai. The first, chole omer tzarich, v'rofei omer eino tzarich, shomim lechole. When there's a conflict between the chole who says I must eat, and the rofe who says no, he can survive it. We will listen to the chole, and he doesn't fast, he eats. My timer. Why do you prefer the word of the chole when there's an expert rofe here with a great deal of experience, and based on his medical knowledge, he declares that he doesn't have to eat? And Rabbi Yanai quotes a pasuk in Tehillim, Leiv yodea moras nafsho. A person feels and knows his own troubles better than anyone else knows it. So the leiv, the heart of this person who's suffering moras nafsho, yodea, his yediyah, is superior to anyone else's yediyah. I guess you would quote Socrates, know thyself. So the Gemara says, Pshita, why do you, Rav Yanai, have to resort to a pasuk? Forget about a pasuk. We have a principle in halacha called Safek Nefashos Lahakil. We will override the Shabbos and certainly on Kippur in any case of Safek. We have now a conflict. We have a contradiction between the Rofe and the person himself. I don't know who really knows the truth here. You know, what is actually the fact, the biological fact on the ground? Will he survive if he survives? Will he perhaps endanger his life? And for sure, the halacha would require that Safek Nefesh Lahakil. I was thinking about this actually on Shabbos. I was thinking about whether or not in Florida, you know, they would violate the Shabbos on the outside chance that maybe they'll save one life over there. And the answer is yes. That, I don't know if the Shaila came up, but that's called Mefaktin Asagal. That's the sugya that we're going to learn today. That we dig up the stones under debris because maybe we'll find a Jew that's still alive. That's called Safek Nefesh Lahakil. So why do you have to resort to quoting the pasuk Leiv Yodea Moras Nafsho? Pshita. And Gemara answers, Mao, the same I would have said, Rofe Kimle Pfei. This is not a Safek. Who knows the repercussions of fasting better than the medical experts in the field? And if the Rofe Uman, he's an expert, he tells you that the guy can fast, then he can fast. There's not a Safek over here. Kamash Malon, Rabbi Yanai has to resort to quoting the pasuk in Tehillim to prove that we listen to the Choleh. That if he tells me he has to eat, it means he has to eat. And we rely on him, despite the experts. By the way, you know, my father, may rest in peace, was the chaplain of the Coney Island Hospital. It's a major hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And when the issue of Yom Kippur came up every year with regard to the Jewish patients, and almost all the Jewish patients in the hospital wanted to observe Yom Kippur, he found the following. He said that the non-Jewish Rofim almost in every case would say he can fast. And the Jewish Rofim who are not religious, they say, oh, let him eat, you know, he should eat. Very strange. A Rofe Omit Sar. What happens in this case? The medical professional says he has to eat. This is the flip side of what we discussed in the first case of Rabbi Yanai. This is the safe of Rabbi Yanai. The Chol says I can make it. Show him l'rofe. Now again, you could ask Pshita. The Gemara, instead of asking Pshita, the Gemara asks my timer. What is the basis for the premise that the Rofe is saying the truth. I mean, Rabbi Yana, you based yourself on a pasuk in Mishlei, Lev Yodea Mars Nafsho. It would seem, therefore, that a person knows his body better than anyone else does, even the Rofe, because we listen to him to determine that he's allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. We should therefore listen to the Maras Nafsho of the victim, the person, the Chola, when he says he doesn't have to eat. And the Gemara gives a very interesting answer to explain Rabbi Yana. Tunva hu dinakitle. You know why the Chola is claiming he could fast? Because shtus machmas cholya. He's not thinking clearly. He's in a state of danger, of a very advanced state of illness, and he doesn't have the clairvoyance to determine and make a statement that he has to eat. So we're going to rely on the Rofe. We're not going to rely on him in this case. Yeah, it's right. It's true that Lev Yodea Maras Nafsho, and the person could say about himself that I need to eat, even if the Rofe says he doesn't need to eat. I can't fast. But on the other hand, if he says that he doesn't have to eat, it could be because he's in the state of confusion as a result of his cholia. Therefore, we're going to be makil and apply the principle of safek nefashos lahakil based on the testimony of the Rofe. And there's a member of my wife's family, when she lost it, unfortunately, at the end of her life, she lost her marbles. She would not eat because she would say it's Yom Kippur, So you see that when you lose it, you're confused. And it could be that the reason why the Chola says that I don't need to eat is because he's so fixated on fasting on Yom Kippur. It means so much to him. Like Rav Soloveitchik said once, apparently. It's a crazy story. Towards the end, before he lost it, the doctors told him he couldn't fast, so he had physicians hook him up before Yom Kippur on intravenous. So they said, what's going on? If the Rofe says that you have to eat, you have to eat. He says, for me to eat on Yom Kippur would be like seeing the Churban Abayis in front of my eyes. And therefore, I'm going to use this method, which the Rofim apparently approved, of feeding myself intravenously without having to violate Yom Kippur. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Chole machilinos al pi bekiyah. Now, the word bekiyim is in the plural. So the Gemara's medayek al pi bekiyim in, if more than one rofe, right, a minimum of plural is two, you need a minimum of two rofim to tell you that he has to eat on Yom Kippur, al pi atzmo lo. And what if he himself says that he has to eat? Or for that matter, if one rofe would say he has to eat, we would not let him eat, we would not force him to eat. Now, Rabbi Yanai said that a chole, if he says that he has to eat, even though the rofe says he doesn't have to eat, we listen to the chole. So why does the Mishnah say al pi bekiyim? Al pi bekiyim in, al pi baki echad lo. Furthermore, says the Gemara, I have a second question. Rabbi Yanai says that in a case where he says he doesn't have to eat and one rofe says he has to eat, we will feed him. And yet our Mishnah says, Chole machilinos al pi bekiyim. Baki echad, one baki is not enough. So we really, in effect, have a double contradiction based on our diak in the Mishnah against Rabbi Yanai, both against the first statement of Rabbi Yanai and the second. We have a contradiction against the first statement of Rabbi Yanai because Rabbi Yanai says that the Chola himself could say, I have to eat. And here the Mishnah says you need Bekiyim. Secondly, Rabbi Yanai in the second statement said that if the Chola says I don't have to eat, but he's contradicted by one rofe, he will eat. And here it says you need two Bekiyim. So the Gemara answers, Hochamay Askinon. First, we're going to answer the first question. The Omar lo tzrichna. The Chola says I don't have to eat. And now the Mishnah is of the opinion that in order to contradict the Chola and establish that he does in fact have to eat, we need two rofim. So the Gemara asks, I don't get it. The lispel leal pi baki echad. One baki should be enough according to Rabbi Yana. And the Gemara answers, why does the Mishnah require two bakiyim? Lo tzricha te'ika achrina ba'adei. Besides the chole, there's one rofe who says the Yoma eino tzarf, lo tzarf. He doesn't have to eat. So now you have two against one. You've got the chole himself who says he doesn't have to eat, and you have a rofe baki who is supporting his claim that he doesn't have to eat. On the other hand, you only have one rofe who says he does have to eat. So even Rabbi Yadeh would agree that in this case, the rofe loses his status, and we don't rely on his testimony. He's batel barov, so to speak. And therefore, the Mishnah requires two bikiyim. So now you have two bikiyim against the rofe, baki, and the chol himself, who both say he doesn't have to eat. We will rely on the two bikiyim that he does have to eat. And again, we're in a situation of safek nefashos lahakol. Now the Gemara asks another kasha. If the Mishnah is talking about a case of a chola and another baki and one physician, both of whom say he doesn't have to eat, then what are we going to do with the other din in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Machilin osal pi b'kiyim. Pshita. You have two against two. Why did the Mishnah have to bother telling me that in such a case we will feed him? Safek nefashos lahakil, it's two against two. Safek nefashos lahakil. Lo tzricha. What's the case in the Mishnah? It's three against two. What does that mean? De'ika trei achrina ba'adei. Besides the chola who says he doesn't have to eat, there are two other expert doctors who say diamri lo tzarch. Now we have three opinions that he doesn't have to eat. There are only two opinions on the other side of the equation that say he does have to eat. And the Mishnah is telling me a big chiddush over here, that we're going to listen to the two and allow him to eat against three. And that seems to be against the principle of Rav Safra, Afal Gav the Omer of Safra, in the case of Edus, Trey Kamea, Umea Kitrei, that even though we don't count numbers in Edus, says Rav Safra, Hani Mili Linyan Edus, Aval Linyan Umdana, when we're dealing with what we call in modern Hebrew, haracha, which means an evaluation, then Basa Deos Azlinon, we rely on Rov. And here in our case, in which we're trying to determine whether the chol has to eat or not, we're not dealing with edus, but rather we're dealing with umdana, the shots up, as we call it in Yiddish, right? To evaluate whether he has to eat or not. Then, according to Rav Safra, Basar Deos Azlina. In this case, there are two rofim who say that he doesn't have to eat, plus the chola himself who says he doesn't have to eat. That's three, against two experts who say, rofim, that he does have to eat. So the Mishnah is Machadesh, that even Rav Safra would agree in this case that we will force him to eat. Hani Mili, when do we say that we rely on Rov and the mute is command the lesson? No, forget about the mute. They're outnumbered. That's only linear umdana de mamona. When we want, for example, to shots up the value of a piece of land, right? For example, let's say I borrowed $1,000 from you. All right, that's not a good example. Let's say I borrowed, I was going to say $100,000. That's also not a good example. All right, we'll talk about a small piece of property, right? Are there any small pieces of property in Clanton Park that are worth $100,000? Maybe no. I mean,
no.
A very small,
not close.
Yeah, a small lot or something. I don't know what.
Right.
In any event, we have to. Now, if I borrowed $100,000 from you, and I own a lot of real estate, in event that I default on the loan and I don't have money to pay you, then you collect from the estate, from the lot, from the piece of real estate. But we need what's called truma, and we have to evaluate its true market value. And here, Rav Safra says we're going to rely on Rov. So if you have two experts that evaluate it at X, and you have three experts at Y, we'll rely on the Y. Aval, but here in a case where human life is at stake, is Safek Nefashis Lahakil, and we're not going to rely on Rov. We're going to go bust a mute, and we have two Rofim who say that he has to eat, he will eat. Now, in order to reconcile Rav Yanai, the Gemara says that our Mishnah is talking about a case where the Chola says that he doesn't have to eat. So the Gemara asks, V'ha midiktani seifa. Let's read the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, quote, V'im ein sham b'kiyim machilin al salpi atzmo. It means that in the absence of any medical evaluation, we rely on the Chola himself, who says that he has to eat. Now, you just told me that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the Chola says he doesn't have to eat. If the Sefer is talking about a case where the Chola says I have to eat, then it's logical to maintain the integrity of the Mishnah that the Reisha likewise is discussing a case where the Chola says he has to eat. And that's against Rav Yana. Because Rav Yana says, Machilin also al pi atzmo. And the Mishnah says, Machilin also al pi Bekir. So the Gemara says, we have to add a middle phrase that was omitted in the Mishnah. When do we say that we're not going to feed the Chola unless we have two Bekiyim, two expert doctors, the Omer Lo Tzarchani, because the Chola himself says, I don't need to eat, and he knows better than the Rofim, but there are two Rofim. Aval Omer Tzarchani. If he claims that he has to eat, then as long as Ein Shom B'Kiyim Trey, if there are no two expert doctors who say that contradict him and say he doesn't have to eat, Elachad, the Omar Lo Tzorch, there's only one physician who says he doesn't have to eat. The Machilin Osal Pi Atzmo, as Rabbi Yanai says, based on the pasuk in Tehillim, Leiv Yodea Maris Nafsho, we did not disqualify the claim of the Chola himself. So it comes out that the way the Gemara is interpreting the Sefer, this din that we listen to the Chola when he says I have to eat, even if he's contradicted by a Rofe, that's only if he's contradicted by one single doctor. But if there are two Rofim who say he doesn't have to eat, then we don't listen to the Chola. And now the Gemara is going to quote a dissenting view of Ma'abar Avashi. Ma'abar Avashi Yoma called Heicha Diyomer Tzarchani. If the Chola says I have to eat, then afilu ika mea di amri lo tzarach. There are 100 doctors who say that he can survive the fast. There's no danger to his life. Lididei shaminan, according to Ma'abar Avashi, we always listen to him. He's got what you call veto power. Shenemar leiv yodea moris rat nafsho. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. If that's the opinion of Ma'abar Avashi, what are you going to do with that Mishnah? The reason why we'll rely on him when the Chol himself says I have to eat, that's only because Ein Sham B'Kiyim, in the absence of any other information and evidence to the contrary. Taima Deleka B'Kiyim or Ika B'Kiyim, if we had experts and they say that the Chol does not have to eat, then lo, we don't listen to the Chola. Now, Ma'abar Avashi said that we always listen to the Chola, even if he's contradicted by 1,000 physicians. Pachi Kamar. This is how we have to interpret the Mishnah according to Ma'abar Avashi. But when do we say that we're not going to let him eat based on his own claim that he has to eat because he's contradicted by two experts? That's the Omer Lo Tzarchani. That's in the opposite case where he says I don't have to eat. Then we're going to listen to the B'Kiyim against his claim that he doesn't have to eat. If Omar Tzarechani, I have to eat, then it's considered like Ein Sham B'Kiyim Klal. No matter how many experts say he has to eat, no matter how many experts say he doesn't have to eat, it's considered as if all the experts agree with him. And Machilin Osal Piatzmo Shenemer Leiv Yodea Moras Nafsh. Now we have the Mishnah Bulmus. Bulmus is someone who's starving. Let me just look for a moment at the English translation of the word bulmus. I always assumed it meant that he's in a state of starvation. He translates it as bulmus. Shkar. So if you look in the footnote, number 24,
Hunger.
Hunger. Okay, good. Life-threatening disease. It's a disease induced by hunger. Okay, so it's a little bit different. Now,
Oh,
one of these
vision.
symptoms
Yeah,
is that
yeah, yeah. Your eyesight. It's your
it
eyesight, I
affects your
think.
eyesight. There should be a word for it. I don't know. For some reason, the English
Yeah, I
translation
don't know.
doesn't have the word. All right. There are enough doctors in your neighborhood you could ask. All right. Misha Bulmus. Actually, one of the doctors in your neighborhood passed on. I wanted to attend the Shiva, the Shloshim, not the Shloshim. Was Dr. Shields' yard side or the
No,
Shloshim?
no, no. They were there. No, no, no. Dr. Shields. They were
Yeah, it
putting
was
up
the
the
Shloshim.
Matseva. It was a Matseva.
Oh, I come to say.
It was
For
a Kama
some
Matseva.
reason,
Yeah.
Wayne sent it to me, the linkage, and I lost it.
And you lost it. Oh, yeah. It was last. I couldn't make it either. It was last a few days ago. It was last week.
Yeah. Anyway, he was a very interesting doctor, very interesting personality. He's a moil, of course, as well. Anyway,
Yeah.
Misha Bulmos, a person who is suffering from this disease from hunger, and his life is in danger. We can feed him whatever we have to feed him, even if we have to feed him. Let's say we'll have a case soon of the spleen of a dog. A dog is a non-kosher animal, and in certain cases of rabies, there might be, if you catch the rabid dog that bit him, well, we'll see about that. In any event, we're allowed to feed him until he gets well, meaning he's out of the state of sakana. How do we evaluate if he's already past the state of he's out of danger? Achia oru enov, when his eyesight goes back to what it was, and when that symptom is removed, then we know he's healthy, and we no longer feed him on Yom Kippur, and certainly we don't feed him non-kosher food. Now, it's very strange that the Mishnah has to bother telling me that we can feed him until his eyesight is restored, that we can fill him non-kosher meat. If you're allowed to feed him on Yom Kippur, which is an Isser Kares, according to everyone, it's an Isser Kares. So for sure, you're allowed to feed him Dvarim Tmein, non-kosher food. So in the note that I have here, he says, in the name of the Kesef Mishnah, that the Tana wants to teach me a chiddush that immediately we feed him mashe baralanu kimoil. In other words, let's not look around and see if we can reduce the Isser and take something that's less severe or less stringent, when the first thing that we come upon that could save his life and protect him, we feed him. And let's not look into the details and decide, what maybe we can reduce the level of the Isser. However, many centuries after the Kesef Mishnah, the Siach Yitzchak disagrees, and he says we're going to learn in the Gemara, maybe we'll get to it in a minute, that we really should feed him a lesser Isser. So the Gemara is going to have a discussion what's less, Tevel or Truma. So you see that we're not going to just feed him the first thing that comes to our hand. We're going to try to see if we can get something that's a little bit of a lighter Avir. In any event, Misha Neshacho Kelev Shota, a rabid dog, Ein Machilin also Mechatzar Kaved. There's a part of the liver of the dog, which is called Yoseres HaKaved, or Machat Chatzar HaKaved, Shalo, of this dog. And it seems like it was standard practice in the medical field that they would take the Yoseres HaKaved and extract it from the dog, the rabid dog, and feed it to the Cholah. And this is a violation of the Isser Nevela of the Behemoth Tmei, I should say, because a dog is a Behemoth Tmei. It's not allowed to be eaten. Now, you would have said that we should feed it to him because it's an accepted practice, it's a common custom, and that's how they try to administer medical help for a person who was bitten by a rabid dog, which is a very dangerous thing. I don't have to tell you. And Rabbi Masi ben Charash indeed is mate. He says this is a refuah, and it's been accepted. And we assume that the Rofim know that scientifically, or at least what we call, what's the word I'm looking for? Clinically, it works. We may not know the science of it, but clinically it works. So there's a long debate here about the Shitas Chachamim, why they don't allow feeding him that part of the animal, the dog. And the Rambam writes that Yoseres HaKaved is called Derech Sgula, meaning it's not medically justified. We cannot, no way that we can explain why this would have helped him. It's a skula. I don't know, a skula is some medical therapy, and we don't allow violating an Issa Torah unless it's accepted medical practice that has a rational scientific explanation as to why it works. Rabbi Masi apparently held that there is a medical reason for it. We don't know what it is, but it's not a derech skula. Or alternatively, he thinks that when we're desperate to save someone's life, we'll use whatever method we can, even if it heals derech skula. And this question, by the way, came up during Corona, not with regard to rabid dog, but there were people who wanted to use certain kinds of skulos as therapy for very ill Corona patients. And there was a whole debate about it. The Ode, and furthermore, Omar Abmasi ben Chorash HaChoshesh Begrono, if he has some sort of a gum disease, now when the gums begin to spoil, that can be very, very dangerous. In fact, my father told me that Reb Shlomo Palachek died from a gum disease at the age of 52. Who is Reb Shlomo Palachek? There are many, many cities in Israel that have a street named after him. It's called Rehov HaIlui. The man who was a genius. They used to say about the Masechet Eli, came from the city of Masechet, that you could make two Einsteins out of his brain. He was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Brisker, and Reb Chaim said that his depth, his Amkus, begins when my ends. That's what Reb Chaim said about the Masechet Eli. My father told me he died of a gum disease. They didn't treat it with penicillin, going back to the year, 1930 or so. So maybe even earlier, they didn't have penicillin, and he died.
Wow. So
the Mishnah says, normally we don't administer medical therapy on Shabbos, but in this case we do. And there's a very important note here in the footnote. He says, Tolchin asovin o mevashlimosum. There's certain herbs that we're allowed to pluck out of the ground, which is a malacha d'oraisa of tlisha, or we're now allowed to cook them for the sake of this chole garon, whose gums are diseased. V'chol sofik nefashos doches haShabbos. We will override the Shabbos for any sofik. And the first want to know, we're learning about Yom Kippur. Why did the Mishnah put in Shabbos here? And the answer is that Shabbos is more severe than Yom Kippur. It's a chiyuv skila. And the Mishnah wanted to teach me that sofik nefashos lahakel, even on a chiyuv skila like Shabbos, certainly on Yom Kippur. Then the Mishnah says, Misha naflo of mapolis. I mentioned to you earlier, the debris fell upon him. And sofik, we don't know, number one, if he's there, maybe he got out. Sofik number two, even if he's there, chai sofik mes, maybe he died already. Sofik number three, he might be a kusi, sofik Yisraeli. We're not sure if he's Jewish. So statistically, the possibility of violating the Shabbos and saving his life is very narrow, very low. But mefakin all of us a gal, we will dig this gal and violate the malacha d'oraisa of charisha for the sake of the possibility of saving his life. Matza'u chai. If we find him alive, then we continue and we do more mefakhin asagal in order to make sure that we get him out, and maybe we'll find other bodies there via mace. But if he died yanichu, we're not allowed to move his corpse, and that's a result of muktzah. But the Gemara is going to have a whole discussion about this later on Daf Pei Hey. Gemara says, How do we test him to find out that this bulmus case, now his eyesight has been restored to him? Do we give him an eye test? Let's say it's nighttime. And the question is whether we'll feed him on Yom Kippur at night, and no one is seeing too clearly at night, is the Brisa says, Mishayavchin beitov v'ra. Very interesting. Omar Abai b'taimo. We'll give him two foods to taste. One is good, one is, I guess, spoiled or so. If he could tell the difference between what's called a tavshel tov and a tam of a tavshel ra, that itself is indicative of the fact that he's already restored his health. And once again, I quote COVID because a lot of people couldn't taste during COVID. And if, let's say, you had a loss of taste and then that symptom evaporated and now you taste something, then it's pretty, again, I'm not a doctor, but it's pretty logical to assume that you're doing better. What we'll do is we'll feed him that which is less stringent first. And if that works, fine. If that doesn't work, then we go up the ladder from less severe to more severe. For example, the Brisa says tevel unevela. We have fruits that they didn't take trumets of meisers, and if you eat tevel, that's a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. The vela is only a regular lav, and if that'll help, machilin also nevela, because that's kal. What happens in a case of tevel shvius? Shvius is an iser essay because of kedusha shvius, and it's much less severe than tevel, which is a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. But tevel truma, and the halacha is that if a non-Kohen eats truma, then he's chayav misa b'dei shamayim. That puts tevel and truma on the same level. What should I choose? Tanoi, that's machlokas tanoi. The sign you learned in the Brisa, misha achazo bulmis, and we have two choices of tevel and truma. According to the first opinion, machilin also tevel, ain machilin also truma. That's the Tanakama. But Ben Tema Omer, truma velo tevel. We will feed him truma rather than tevel. The Gemara explains this machlokas between the Tanakama and Ben Tema. Omar Rabba, one case everybody agrees. Let's clear out the simple cases. The efsha b'chulin. Let's say you have truma and tevel in front of you. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. I just got to get the calculation here for 1 second. You have enough chulin such that after you mafresh truma. So it works like this. Truma is truma. But the tevel, all you have to do is be mafresh. Once you mafresh truma from the tevel, then the tevel becomes chulin. Is kuliyamalo pligi mesaknina lei umesafnina lei. We will be mafresh truma from the tevel, and the balance is chulin, and we'll feed him the chulin. And the mafarshim here go to town. Like, what are you teaching me over here? Obviously, if you can be mafresh the truma, we want to know what happens if you have tevel, but it's a very limited amount. And if you're mafresh truma, you'll be left with chulin that's not enough to save the life of the cholin. So that's a major question here on this Gemara. And in all likelihood, we have to assume that that case is pshita. I mean, if after your mafresh you have enough of a volume of chulin that you can save his life, that's pshita that you'll be mafresh to. The chiddush of Rabbah is that you might not have enough chulin left over after the afrasha, and now you have a choice of either feeding him tevel or truma. Keep pligi below efsha b'chulin. After you mafresh the truma. Now here again, there's a whole to do. We have a principle called chita achas poter sakli akri. There's no minimum amount of of grain that you have to separate as truma. Even one chita, one kernel is enough. So the Gemara is very difficult. What does it mean below efsha b'chulin? That after he's mafresh truma, there won't be enough chulin left to save his life. What do you mean? Just because he took off one kernel for truma? In any event, what is the machlok? Says Rabbah Marsav, according to Ben Tema, tevel chamur. Tevel is more chamur than truma, and therefore we should feed him part chulin and part truma, meaning we'll be mafresh whatever we have to be mafresh, the minimum amount from the tevel. And even though the balance is not chulin, the balance of chulin is not sufficient to save his life, but we'll now feed him truma. The other option would have been to feed him the tevel. We're not going to be when we have the option of saving his life with truma. That's what we're going to use. The Gemara is going to explain why. So therefore, what we'll do is we'll be mafresh truma from the chulin. From the tevel. What we're left with is a certain volume. We'll call it X of chulin. We need Z, so we'll add X to Y, meaning we'll add truma to the X amount of chulin, and that's called kal tchila. Umars over the Tanakama holds that truma chamura. Therefore, whatever amount of tevel that we have to feed him, we will feed him, and we will not be mafresh truma, because in a choice between truma and tevel, truma is chamura, we have to feed him tevel. And now the Gemara explains the underlying logic of this machlokas. Marsav according to Tema tevel chamur. Why? Because tevel is also to everyone. No one's allowed to eat tevel. Aval truma chazi l'kohen. Truma is relatively kal on the totem pole relative to tevel because it's also to zarim, non-kohen but not to kohen. Marsav the Tanakama says truma chamura. Why? There's no heter to truma. Aval tevel efshal itikune. But tevel, on the other hand, all you have to do is be mafresh trumas of meisters, and then the tevel becomes mutal chalada. That makes it a relatively iser kal. Now, on the top of Big Gimel and days, and we'll wrap it up very quickly because it's getting late, is Rabbah was machadesh that if after you mafresh truma from the tevel that's in front of us, you'll have enough chulin to be machil and save the life of the chola. And everybody would agree that we should be masakein the tevel by being mafresh truma. So the Gemara asks, efshar b'chulin shita. If you're telling me as a result of hafrashas trumas and maisros, you'll have enough of a balance of chulin to save his life, shita. Why did Rab have to tell me this chiddush? We were very confused about this. The Gemara answers, Lo tzricha, he needs a chiddush in Shabbos. That even though on Shabbos there's an Isra Hafrashas Trumas and Maisers, everybody agrees that under these circumstances, there'll be mafresh Trumas and Maisers on Shabbos in order to remove the Isra Tevel and feed the Cholech Chulin. Once again, but Shabbos Nami Pshita. We're talking about a life-threatening situation. And you're telling me you can't be mafresh Trumas and Maisers? That's an Isra D'Rabbanan and Shvus of Shabbos. Certainly the Shabbos lends itself to being trumped even in Malacha, how much more so in D'Rabbanan for the sake of Pikuach Nefesh. So the Gemara answers, Tiltul Midrabbanan hu. That because of the Isa to be mafresh Truma on Shabbos, now to be metaltil, to move the tevel in its present state because it doesn't lend itself to Afrasha, it's classic muktzah. And that's the Rabbanan. So the Gemara says for sure it would be a better choice to violate an Isa Rabbanan in order to avoid feeding him tevel.
Right.
So once again, we still have a difficulty. What was the chiddush here of Rabbah to tell me that would be mafresh trumas and maisers? Better to give up on a violation of a D'Rabbanan for the sake of the Chole than to violate Shabbos. Than to violate Tevel by feeding him Tevel, which is Doraisa. We're talking about a non-perforated flower pot, and the Isa Tevel is only D'Rabbanan, because Trumas of Maisras is only generated by Gedule Karka. And here we're talking about Eino Nakuf. Eino Nakuf means that there's no nurturing from the ground. It's not sucking up the nutrients from the ground because it's a flat bottom flower pot. But the Rabbanan made a Gzera, and they said there's an Isa Tevel even in an Otzit Shein and Nakuf, and therefore you chayav to be mafresh Trumo Maisers Mirabbanon. Rabba wants to teach me that it's better to be mafresh Trumas and Maisers and violate the Isa Tiltul, which is only the Rabbanon, rather than feed him Tevel, even though this Isa Tevel in this particular case of an Otzit Shein and Nakuf is the Rabbanon, because if they're going to feed him Tevel, then they're going to come to be matir, mistakenly feeding him Tevel Doraisa, which we don't want to do. And now the machlokus is clear. Mar Savar, according to Ben Tema, Tevel Chamur, and therefore it makes sense that we should prefer that when mafresh Trumas and Maises to be misakin the Tevel, and therefore that's better because once we're mafresh Truma, we left with Chulin, and even if it means we'll have to feed him both Chulin and Truma, we don't have enough Chulin, but nevertheless, we'd rather reduce the amount of Truma that we give, but we will not feed him Tevel because Tevel is more Chomer than feeding him Truma. Now, exactly why Tevel is more Chomer than Truma, that's going to be the next sugya, which we're not going to cover today. But Marsav, according to Tanakama, Truma Chamura. Truma is more Chamur, and therefore we should feed him the fruits or the vegetables, whatever it is, the grains as is in the state of Tevel, and we're not going to be mafresh Truma, because if we're mafresh Truma and we need to feed him Truma, we don't have enough Chulin, then Truma Chamura, and that's a more serious violation of the Iser of eating Truma. And this leads us to the fifth line, Lema Kitanoi, in which we're going to try to analyze, based on a machlokas tanoim, which is more chamur, achilas tevel or achilas truma lazar. Okay.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much. We accomplished a great deal.
Yeah, it was good.
Wish you a great
have an easy fast.
Okay. Here it's almost over already. You know? No, the 2.5 hours.
Not us. Okay.
Cool.